Hey, everybody. I am pleased to welcome fellow Blue, if I can say that now. When we go back, we weren't old, right? I'll speak for myself, basically. Legendary Darryl Stallworth, a fantastic attorney out of Oakland, Berkeley, and the East Bay, criminal defense. And he's involved in a case that is one you should hear about. And I'm going to endeavor to talk less than he so he can present all that you need to know about this case and then some of Teaunte Bailey. Uh, Fellow Golden Bear, I welcome you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Zennie. I've been looking forward to being able to catch up with you, and I'm always willing to talk about the complexities and the different layers of what happens in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Hey, tell us what this case is all about, because I saw a reference you pointed to another publication, but I thought it was more about, as I read it, plaintiff rather than your client. And so I was kind of searching around for it, like, where is this? I thought, you know what? I need to get him on the show.
Case of Teaunte Bailey is a classic example of what has happened in the criminal justice system, where we've looked to find ways to incarcerate people at the maximum level for crimes that don't always actually add up to that particular time. The biggest fight in the criminal justice system is trying to find a way to have a reasonable resolution or to appropriately or reasonably punish somebody. And in the course of doing so, when we look at the history of crimes and the type of crimes that are committed and the type of penalties, murder is the one at the top of the list. And if you do something and you intend to kill somebody and you are held accountable, that's understandable. But a number of years ago, this rule came out called the felony murder rule. And that's a rule that says that if you're engaged in a particular type of felony, one that is considered to be dangerous, if someone dies as a result of you just being on the scene or being a lookout or being available or helping to plan this event, you are going to have the intent of murder placed upon you, whether you have that intent or not. And that's at the heart of the Teaunte Bailey case. I said in my opening statement, and I repeated it in my closing argument, that Teaunte Bailey is guilty of robbing this poor elderly man and taking his satchel and taking his phone. And he did that by punching him when the man would not easily allow him to take the property. And that became his crime. But unfortunately, it was an elderly man who was particularly fragile. And when he hit the ground and he hit the pavement, he hit his head and he suffered internal hemorrhaging, created a risk of life. He also had already suffered cardiovascular disease, which made him even more vulnerable. And he passed away. They had to take him off life support because he was unable to sustain himself. Horrible and sad. But the challenge with this case was, do you find him guilty for the robbery or do you find him guilty for the murder? And that's what we were facing. I was trying to, through the case and through the evidence that the prosecutor presented, show the jury that this wasn't a murderer, it was merely a robber, a burglar.
How does one, or how do you get one to understand accident versus intent? Because it seems like, particularly in the heat of an argument like a case like this, those two could be very easily confused, right?
Yeah, what I've learned doing this work for 32 years is that there's really no clear fact. A lot of people would say, well, the facts are clear. It's about perception. This whole criminal justice system is subjective. What you perceive to be intent, someone else could perceive to be negligence. What you perceive to be self-defense, someone else can perceive to be aggressive and that you're the one that's provoking it. We've seen it in the history of police contacts and the excessive force and what police officers believe is an immediate threat to their lives versus what the overall public sees when they watch the video. So I am no longer surprised by what anybody sees or interprets. I just try to find the people that are going to be at least open to the idea that their beliefs can be biased or they can be influenced by a certain process. Sometimes I call it indoctrination. We're indoctrinating people to believe that if you do anything that's bad and someone dies, you should go to prison for the rest of your life. This is horrible. It's murder. But that's in the abstract. You got to think about it a little bit more personal. Like if somebody in your family had a bad run and they were doing things that got they got the trauma from childhood, they got the poor education, they've got the alcohol and drug addiction, and now they're becoming desensitized to this robbery because they're trying to take care of their addictions and their trauma. So they're not really bad people, they're just desensitized. I call them like robots. People want to get upset at people who commit crimes as if it's just personal, but they're really just no longer able to have a sense of compassion or empathy. And you can be angry at them, but that's not going to help change this whole trend.
Help me with something in my mind. I've been tracking something called, for want of a better term, basically people who checked out of the labor force, not counted in the statistics. And there's something called the labor force participation rate. And if you take out 2 states, that's 50%, which means that it's a 50% chance that we're either in the system or not, which is unprecedented. My point is, to what extent is our creating that situation where we have people out of the system, maybe on drugs, maybe, and I'd like to find out more about your client situation, that's creating criminals, literally creating not criminals, but people who do accidental acts, who take acts that they turn around and gosh, oh, I didn't really mean to do that. They were driven mad literally by the situation. Is that your client's case?
Yeah, he is a classic textbook example of what happens with the kid who's got no real education, raised in a dysfunctional family, some abuse, verbal, physical, and sexual. And then he grows up in an environment where he's being fed and he's being given all of these different tools of surviving: the hustle, the grind, it's the robbing, it's the burglary, it's the theft. So he's living in that environment and he's becoming desensitized. It's the first step in criminal behavior. All of us have the ability to make bad decisions and do bad things. But if you're nurtured and you grew up in a healthy environment, you've got good teachers, good coaches, you've got a brother-in-law, it doesn't have to be your father, but you need a real strong male figure in your life. Yeah. That can help you Definitely. Make better decisions. But you got none of that, then crime and doing bad things becomes too easy. One of my jurors in a case a couple of months ago said it very clearly. We're asking if he could be fair, and he said, I don't think I can serve on the jury because what I see and what you're telling me about this case is that people are doing bad things and it's just too easy. I can never get over how easy it is for someone to pull out a gun, to rob someone, to break a car window, to do these things. But for them, it's become so automatic because they don't have empathy. They don't have a sense of commitment. They don't have a sense of community. It's not an excuse. I'm not going to sit up here and tell people that, folks should get a pass for that.
Right.
But have to do a better job of really pulling back the layers and understanding that, the punishment and the penalty is fine, but that's not going to stop this crime trend, because no one knows or even cares about the penalty or punishment. They don't care about pulling out a gun and shooting somebody. They don't care that they're going to do 25 to life. But you got to back up and get back to a place where you change the way people see themselves and the way they see others.
Do you think this case gets as much attention as it does because of the Pamela Price situation, wherein she is, it would seem up for we'll have to see how it plays out, recall because she wasn't, tough on criminals?
That was the lead in. Right before we started the trial, the prosecutor went on the record and said that my supervisor, which is Pamela Price, the head of the office, has requested or has instructed me to take away the special circumstance. And special circumstance is a fancy way of saying, if this person is convicted, we're not going to put him in life. We're not going to have him serve a life sentence without parole. the most he's going to serve is 25 to life, which is really life with a parole hearing in 25 years. So in her platform and what she campaigned on was that I'm not going to contribute to mass incarceration. I'm going to pull back these statutes and these enhancements, and I'm going to have some discretion. So that was got everybody's attention to begin with. Like, hey, we want life without parole. There's some people who still want the death penalty, so that's going to cause some pushback. But the big issue in this case, and I thought that the reporter from Berkeley who did the article did a very good job of walking the audience through the most important issue.
That was the Berkeley Scanner, right?
Yeah, Berkeley Scanner.
Yeah. Emily Raguso, is that her last name?
Yeah. Really good writer. Put out a good article about the case in the beginning and the end. So she pointed out the felony murder, and she pointed out what we really had was an elderly man who was minding his own business, who was taking a walk, and you've got a black guy with another black guy. They were unable to convict the person that was the passenger or the driver in the car because they couldn't figure out whether he was really the co-defendant or not. And I thought that would happen, and his attorney did a really good job in telling the jury that the prosecutor hadn't proved that part. But for my guy, who they concluded was the person who got out the car and did the attack, the issue was, can this be a murder? Can we get there? And the law made it pretty simple for them. The law said that if you're in the robbery, and you're committing the robbery, which they had no problem concluding, and you're the person who causes, they call it the actual killer. I don't even like using the word killer because he punched him.
Yeah.
Punched him in the face. He wasn't trying to kill him. But
it was like he was trying to subdue him, not kill him.
Yeah, he wanted the bag. He snatched it. He grabbed it. There was some resistance, and he punched him on the left cheek, and he fell, and he hit the right side of his head, and it was all bad after that.
Has your client expressed remorse as to what happened, or what is his mental state?
I can't tell you anything that he's shared with me, but I can tell you that he is, once again, he's the poster child for trauma, addiction. In this system, Zennie, there's crazy and there's insane. If you're insane, then you have a legal defense. But if you're crazy, you're just crazy. And we grew up and we've grown up with crazy people, but it doesn't make them insane to the point that they have a legal defense. That life, that grind, that hustle has contributed to some mental impairment. So he is not, he's not educated. He's not able to really understand and appreciate some of the things that have taken place, but he's not on the scale of not knowing what he's charged with and what he's been facing. And part of the case was as well that he had another burglary a couple weeks before this particular event. And he was on an ankle monitor because he was on probation and parole. So he was not a stranger to the criminal justice system. And that made him, that presented someone that the jury, I'm sure, thought was a veteran and that was seasoned. But for him, it was, once again, it was as if he was going to McDonald's every day. That was his lifestyle. He didn't know any better. He didn't care. That's what he did.
What is it about what's going on with our society where it seems all of a sudden we want to tar and feather people like Mr. Bailey, as opposed to a time when it seemed we were more sympathetic to the causes behind their circumstances?
Well, part of it's the media. People get to see more. They're fed more. They're more interested. These type of cases are getting highlighted, and it makes for good. It makes for good sound bites. Politician out there and you want to be tough on crime, then you're going to point to a Teaunte Bailey and say, hey, he was on an ankle monitor. He had been in the system. If we had put him in jail for life earlier, this wouldn't have happened. So that's getting there. The sympathy and the empathy that existed when I started 32 years ago, not so much. With the exception that started with this, the felony murder rule has been reformed. It has been edited. You can no longer hold the person who's not physically responsible for the death responsible for the murder unless they're a major participant and they show reckless indifference. Two fancy words that means, if the driver were identified and had gotten out the car and stood next to Mr. Bailey, or if the driver has applied the weapon and they proved that, then that person also could have been under that felony murder rule. And with no intent to kill, in the street language, he was doing too much. So if you find that someone is doing a little bit more than just being a lookout or being a driver, if they're more engaged, then they can fall under that umbrella as well. But before, you could just be the person that wrote down the map or the address, and you could be convicted of murder if you were part of the felony. And that no longer exists. And that's helped a lot of folks who've been incarcerated come home. If they were doing life sentences, you look up 25 years later, this new law comes out, you weren't the actual killer, you've done your time, you get to come home.
So we say, some of us, hey, look, it's wrong to have these exorbitantly high sentences for those who are accused and blamed. Then when we get a district attorney who actually wants to carry out an edict that respects that, all of a sudden there seems like this bedlam, huh? That's weird.
Yeah, it is. It's politics. From everything I've learned about, I was a political science major, so I mean, it's what we're doing on a national scale. We've got a division in our country. We've got somebody from the Republican Party that's got views that are drastically different than the Democratic Party. And on any particular night, depending on what you're listening to, somebody's saying horrible things about that guy, and then someone's saying horrible things about the other guy. And it's scary how close it is between what party's going to prevail. And the same thing in the criminal justice system. You've had some really conservative prosecutors, you've had some liberal ones. It's been sort of this shift, about the recall over in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So there's a very small gray area, I feel, where no one is dominating the platform as to tough on crime versus smart on crime. Which one is going to prevail? And in this most recent election, Pamela Price's campaign was she was going to be smart on crime. There was a young lady a number of years ago named Kamala Harris, I think, coined that phrase. And she was a San Francisco County DA. She was the Attorney General for the state of California. She became a senator, and she's our vice president. So that's someone that's been a prosecutor, but not someone that was dug in on ultimate punishment and life without parole and death penalty stuff. She didn't do that, and it boded well for her.
So how much of this do we attribute to Donald Trump and the rhetoric that the day he announced he was going to run for president back in 2014, he comes down the escalator, he says insulting things about Mexicans, and he uses language that we hadn't heard before. It was shocking. And then he just sort of amped up the talk and started off on that divided path. Can we rightly say that Donald Trump is responsible in part for how your case is coming out and going?
Well, I think you could argue that the trickle-down theory is that Donald Trump has been able to do what he's been doing, despite all of the indictments, despite of all of the histories, despite all of the things that people have brought out, because he has been able to master the two things that can make you effective in this society, and that is misinformation and fear. And Donald Trump has made that a skill beyond anybody's imagination, because he's taken a good part of this country and given them information I believe is not true, and he's scared them. And those two things have made him a person that people follow. It's not unlike a religion. It's not unlike a particular, I don't want to say the word cult, but it's close to it. I mean, when you follow somebody despite all the transgressions, because they're giving you a message that you can relate to, then that's what happens. And it trickles down to the criminal justice system. If you tell people that, hey, if we don't do this, then you're going to be next. If we don't get tougher on crime, then they're going to come into your house. If we don't stop people from coming from the border, then we're going to have these problems with housing. You're not going to be able to do these things. If you keep feeding people with the misinformation and then you scare them and tell them that it's going to hurt them and their family, then that's where we have this big divide.
And I want to get your thoughts on this headline because it is it's sad, all all things considered. But here's the headline, Darryl. Posted 4 hours ago.
Yeah.
And your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a article. It's a headline that I've seen for 32 years. I started my career as a prosecutor, and I believed in people having to be accountable. And I stood up over 50 times after a murder conviction and talked about cases. But I always made a point back then that it's a tragedy for everybody that's involved. This isn't just about being angry at this person for committing this crime. This is about a society that's created an environment where we're going to keep getting these headlines unless we do something in the early stages of our young people's life. In this particular case, because of that felony murder rule, I don't feel like Teaunte Bailey should have the word murder next to his name. Robber, burglar, some dysfunction, some addictions, some problems, but killing someone and being responsible for their death are two different things.
So that headline should really read Oakland robber.
Yeah,
right?
Oakland robber found guilty of killing. Oakland robber found guilty of being responsible for the death of a senior citizen. So technically, he punched him, he fell down, he died. So he is the cause of Mr. Park's death. But the word murderer, I don't believe should be associated with this case.
This is a sad outcome, to say the least, and it makes you wonder if we'll ever really get to the root cause of these problems, which have to do with the environmental circumstances, poor economic development, training, everything else. Darryl, will we ever get it?
Most of the people know it, and we have the information. It's not rocket science. I did an article 34 years ago in law school. It says, what's the problem with the crime in the Black community? And it's the same answer: lack of a Black role model, lack of education, lack of nutrition. Our kids don't eat. They eat junk, they watch junk, they live junk, and then they become desensitized. So it's not unknown. These challenges, are we willing to put the time and effort in the front end? And are we willing to work on something that's going to help our young people in the long run? That's not sexy. That's not, that's not a good soundbite. Because, oh, you're just being a liberal. You're just trying to do, all that stuff. We need to lock these bad people up. And that's where that misinformation comes. That's where that fear comes in. If we can get this new generation I teach kids over at Cal State East Bay and talk about careers in law. I said, we need more than just a lawyer. We need social workers. We need police chiefs. We need judges. We need everybody to show some courage to say that, hey, this system is not working. We've got to reinvest in the education. I've always said, this is kind of out there, but we should have boarding schools for young kids who don't have healthy environments. Mm-hmm. Start them off in the morning with breakfast, get them in school, get a good faculty.
You seem like Jerry Brown.
Yeah, it's putting money into the schools, putting money into the kids.
OMI, yeah. OMI, yeah.
What's the formula you probably heard of? If you graduate from high school and you get married before you have a child, you have a 75% chance of doing well and never getting into trouble. Just those two things. But we got so many people who don't graduate from high school and don't wait until they're married to have a child, and they wind up becoming unemployed and disinterested, desensitized, and they're looking for a way to make a living, and that's going to continue to be a problem until we change those criteria.
OMI, folks, is Oakland Military Institute. That was established by Jerry Brown.
Yeah,
He was there. Remember that? Yeah.
Big fan of Jerry Brown. He used to live in the building that I'm in right now when he was working on the governor's mansion getting repaired and renovated. And so I walk the lake and run the lake. So he had, and has always had, some really good fundamental ideas about how we can do better. And we need more of that.
Hey, so how do you foresee, what do you think, crystal ball for me, when are cases like Mr. Bailey's more often now, because of the pandemic and the economic situation that it has caused, on the news about, like you've heard them, smash and grabs, people getting robbed on the street and everything else? Is that also causing more cases like Mr. Bailey's to come to you? And what can we do to stop it?
The first stage of any type of unlawful act creates oftentimes a cycle or a series of other bad decisions. So you're robbing somebody, they resist, you're violent, either physically with your hands or with a gun or with a knife. You are trying to break into somebody's car. Someone comes out to try to stop you. You pull out a gun, they pull out a gun. All of these crimes that are existing now are crimes that are getting ready to go to next levels. And the burglaries and the car break-ins are just horrible. You can't walk down the streets in Oakland, even some of the nice areas of Oakland, without somebody driving by and popping up and busting through the window.
Right. More
enforcement, more patrols, more money. Yeah, but those people that are committing the crimes, those are the ones that are coming out of the poor education, the desensitized families, the addictions, and they don't care.
Yeah, how much of that also is just, and this is my thing, the city not doing its economic development job by not using, for example, AB 464 Mullen, which allows us to form tax increment financing districts, use that property tax money to then fashion programs to help small businesses impacted by the pandemic. That's in writing, right? That's right. That's the way the legislation is written.
Right.
Signing the law, January 2021. I have an interview with Barbie Lopez, who marched it through the legislature right here on Zennie62 YouTube. That's where the interview is. But to this day, Mr. Darryl, to this day, Mr. Stallworth, it has not, and I say this so hesitantly because I'm really upset about it, it still hasn't been implemented. So it's like you have these great laws that are just sitting there, and you have certain council members who then say, well, our system isn't correct, it doesn't get money to the right people, and yet here's the tool to get the money to the right people. They don't use it.
Which is another classic challenge that we've had throughout the history. We've got some good ideas. We've got some things that we've put together. We've got some money set aside, but we got to get to the person that can make it happen. Like, who's the person, or who are the people that are going to be able to have the power to do that? You and I have probably been in thousands of conversations and meetings with people with good intentions, and even receive some type of grant. How do we get to the next level? Who's going to break ground? Who's going to build it? Who's going to make it happen? Who can come in and say, let's do this? And that's what we need more of. I don't know if it's going to be in our generation. We might have to find somebody that's got the energy and the ability to take it to the next step and make it happen.
Mr. Strawberry, I want to have you back to talk more about this, because I have a lot of questions I could fill up another hour, but you don't have that kind of time. But I do want to close. I want to demarcate this with questions, because you are a noted, decorated member of an alumni of the Cal football team, and Cal athletics is going through a gigantic crisis. And I'd like your thoughts on what you think we should do.
Yeah, we're in a tough position with having a couple years where we haven't been real competitive. We haven't been able to get some of the 5-star athletes. There was a time where we've got the Marshawn Lynch's and we got the Deshaun Jacksons. We got all these young, talented players from the West Coast, but they've made their way over to the Midwest and the South. I mean, Alabama's getting athletes from California. They got that running back from out of Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, who's in the NFL now, right in our backyard. So we've got to do some better job of recruiting. Financially, that has an impact. We can't get TV rights if we're not competitive in our two major sports, basketball and football. Those are the ones that are the revenue generators. And everything else is going to follow whether or not we can do that. We don't even talk about basketball. We haven't had a strong basketball.
Yeah. Oh,
excuse me. Go back to Jason Kidd before you can talk about a program that actually people were coming out to see and we were getting TV rights. So those are the challenges, and it's been part of what's been going on with the Pac-10 and the Pac-12 because of the other power schools. I would like to see them recruit some more local teams. San Diego State, San Jose State, those schools are really good, and develop a commitment to putting money and time into a good West Coast football league. It could be the Pac-10, the Pac-12, but I think money is too big, and the Pac-12, I don't believe it's going to exist after 2024. There will be everybody departing to different conferences.
You had a take on the ACC. I'd like if you don't mind, I'd like my viewers to hear regarding the possibility that we go there. Share with them what you think about that.
I think it's troubling because having traveled up and down the coast in a couple games outside of California, that's a lot for a student athlete. You get on a bus on a Friday, you get on a plane, you play on Saturday, you come back late Saturday night, sometimes early Sunday morning. That's just, playing Arizona State. If you have to go play a Florida State or Florida, or if you have to go to the Midwest and play in Michigan or Illinois, that's a 3-day trip. You're going to leave on a Thursday so that you can get there and get rested. You're taking away 3 days, 72 hours of the kid's life who's also trying to compete and be a student. And that's where I think the hypocrisy comes in with the NCAA. Like, you want student athletes. You say they're student athletes because you won't pay them, that's for sure.
No.
But then you treat them like professional athletes, and you wonder why we have trouble with them graduating. We have trouble with them being able to have a plan B. So I think it's sad that we're in a position where the money is becoming too strong of an influence.
I could not agree with you more. Hey, Mr. Strawberry. Hey, thanks a lot. Stick around in the background. Folks, first of all, go Bears. Go Bears. Second, folks, subscribe to Zennie62 on YouTube. Bookmark OaklandNewsNowBlog.com. Check out our new website, ZennieReport.com. 5 websites, WordPress websites on news, Darryl. I got 105 total. Oh, so I'm taxed. Taxed, man.
Applaud you for all the work that you're doing, Zennie.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, good. Yeah, you're here. Yeah. Stick around in the background, folks. That ends this broadcast. We'll be back with NFL talk about a few hours later. Thank you. 3 hours. See ya. All right. Hey, how was that?